Right, my name is Ceridwen and I'm delighted to be here introducing today's programme. I've been a long-standing member of the Academy's Council and a founder member of the Campaign for Social Science. And very importantly in today's context, I'm also a fellow of the Learned Society of Wales. So, and as you probably realise from my name, I'm of Welsh origin. We'll shortly be welcoming Lord Bourne of Aberystwyth, who's a Parliamentary Under-Secretary of the Wales office, but he is coming halfway through the proceedings. I would like to begin, however, with just a few words about the Academy. As some of you know, it's the National Academy for Academics, Practitioners and Learned Societies in the Social Sciences, and it's been going since 1999. We now have over 1,000 eminent social scientists in fellowship and 41 learned societies, and between them they cover a very wide spectrum of social science work and represent altogether about 90,000 social scientists in the United Kingdom, and indeed some from abroad. The Academy established the Campaign for Social Science more recently in 2011 so as to promote a social science work more actively and to a wider community than just the academics and practitioners interested in social science. I'm delighted to welcome to you what is the launch of the 10th in our series, Making the Case for the Social Sciences. This started in 2010 in order to showcase the impact that's continually being made by the excellent UK social science research. And the topics we produced Making the Case booklets on are very diverse. Mental well-being, management, longitudinal studies, climate change, environment, all those sort of things. And I hope some of you have picked up examples of our previous booklets from the table outside. In this event today, we've worked with the Wales Institute of Social and Economic Research, Data and Methods, more commonly known as WIZARD, and the Research Institute for the Applied Social Sciences at Swansea University, which is known as FAcSS, to bring together a wide-ranging collection of some of the finest and most effective social science research produced in Wales, and effective well beyond the boundaries of just the Principality. We're going to hear about 2 case studies from these research projects shortly. One is about improving the effectiveness of homicide investigations, and the second on improving the evidence base for policy on employment and public sector pay. Both very important topics, not just in Wales, but more broadly across the whole of the UK. Wales may be home to just 9 of the UK's 109 higher education institutions, but as you will quickly see when you start looking at the case studies in our booklet, punches well above its weight in contributing to policy and practice. And Welsh-based researchers do this across a whole range of social science areas and disciplines. I just need to point out that the Academy and Campaign receive no public funding and are entirely dependent on their work, on membership subscriptions and donations. None of our Making the Case documents, monographs, can be produced without significant sponsorship. So I'd now like to call upon Professor Ian Rhys-Jones, who's Director of WIZARD, and Professor Judith Phillips, the Director of FAcSS, both of whom are Fellows of the Academy, to say a few words about their organisations and to thank them very much indeed for the generous support they have given, without which this booklet and this event today would not have been possible. So if we could have Judith and Ian come up, they'll tell you a little bit about their organisations.
Okay, diolch yn fawr iawn, Ceridwen. Thank you very much. Pnawn da, ac gai jyst dweud bod o'n bleser mawr iawn gael ei bod yma heddiw i fod yn rhan o'r cyflwyniad yma o waith arloesol yn y gwyddorau cymdeithasau yng Nghymru. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here today, to be part of this presentation of a very wide range of social science talent in Wales. And I'd just like to thank the Academy for putting this together. It's a wonderful booklet, and I think it demonstrates the range of exciting multidisciplinary research across a whole range of substantive research areas that's going on in Wales, from politics to economics, labour markets, as we're going to hear, health, crime, legal issues. It's an amazing presentation of work. And for those of you who don't know, Wizard was set up in 2008, and one of its main aims was to deliver substantive research looking into localities in Wales, but it was also doing work on trying to develop the capacity of social science research in Wales. And by no means can we claim to be responsible for all the research that you're going to hear about today, but I'd like to think that Wizard has played some part in developing the profile of a whole range of social science over the past 7 or 8 years. And I'm very pleased to say that we now have a very strong platform to take more research forward. We have 2 ESRC centres based with Wizard and in conjunction with Swansea University in Administrative Data Research Centre, already doing some very exciting work, and I think developing the social scientists of the future that will hopefully be in the next set of Academy booklets in about 10 years' time. So diolch yn fawr iawn am ddod yma heddiw. Over to you.
Diolch yn fawr, diolch Ceridwen. Prynawn da. Speaking as the director of FAcSS, of course one of the sponsors, I'm delighted to have this opportunity to launch and promote the booklet that's come out today. And I think there are 4 main reasons why it's really timely and very important for us to have produced this booklet and for the Academy to have helped us do this. The booklet highlights the major social science research in Wales undertaken to tackle the issues faced in Wales. And of course, with devolution and powers being devolved down from Westminster, then I think it's imperative that policy and practice in Wales is evidence-based. And the booklet actually shows the great work that's going on in Wales in doing this. But it's not limited to Welsh concerns. Wales is actually contributing knowledge and having impact on the global challenges that we all face as well. And I think never before has social science been so important in addressing what we call the wicked issues: climate change, ageing and dementia care, trafficking, and even public sector pay. And as the booklet demonstrates, several case studies are world-leading and internationally recognised in these fields, and producing high-quality international impact. I think it needs both the international and the local evidence to sustain policies and practices within Wales and across the UK. And we are very fortunate in Wales to have a listening government that actually is engaged in looking at our research and using our research within Wales. The mission of FAcSS at Swansea is twofold. One is to strengthen applied social sciences in the university, and secondly, to embed a social science perspective across the STEM subjects. And I think some of the case studies in the booklet actually really reflect this too. Many of the case studies reflect the increasing and excellent quality applied multidisciplinary research, as Ian has mentioned, and also intersectorial research as well. I think one of the key strengths we have in Wales is actually working across universities on several initiatives that we hold jointly, but also working with business and industry, the public and third sectors. And I think the publication reflects this in the case studies that you see. It's impossible, of course, to capture all of the research in Wales in a 20-page booklet, but I think it gives you a good snapshot of some of the things that are going on. I think thirdly, we are committed to raising the profile of research in social sciences in Wales, making the outcomes of our research much more visible, and today we'll demonstrate that. Initiatives such as the Public Policy Institute, WIZARD, the investment in big data, as Ian has mentioned, the ADRC, are just some of the major investments made in Wales in recent years. And a recent report in 2013 by Robin Williams actually showed that if we did have more research, there would be greater research funding, there would be greater impact. Research in Wales, he felt, was at an all-time high in terms of volume and quality, but we weren't actually communicating that good quality research within Wales and to the rest of the world. And so I'd really like to thank the Academy for allowing us and recognising the importance of showcasing the research social sciences in Wales here today. And I hope that the brochure will enable government and other stakeholders to really appreciate and further their knowledge of Wales and what's going on in Wales. Finally, I think social and behavioural sciences are facing a very difficult time under the current economic situation, and I think it's increasingly important to demonstrate the importance and value of social science and give it greater visibility. Not only is social science great value for money, but also it's important in really improving the quality of life of all people, not just in Wales, but across the UK. And I'd like to thank all the contributors who put so much into the booklet, and hopefully there'll be more to come. So, diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian and Judith. And I could only echo exactly what you've said. It's as if there's a renaissance, a resurgence of social science, enthusiasm and capacity. And your organisations have played a very important part in helping to build that capability and that higher profile for social science. So we're delighted you're here today. And it was a strategic decision, I think, to suggest we have the booklet launched here in London. Not least because not many people in England really know very much about what's going on in Wales. Obviously, when we launch it in Wales, there'll be a much more appreciation, I think. But thank you for coming to us today. I'd now like to move to introduce our contributors. Our first speaker today is Professor Fiona Brookman, who's Deputy Director of the Centre for Criminology in the University of South Wales. She's going to be talking about helping to improve homicide investigations, and she did some very interesting research which had quite an impact. Fiona, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, hello everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to the event today. I'm just going to talk for a short time, maybe about 7 minutes, slightly less possibly, about my impact case study and the research that was involved in that. Sorry. And then I'm also going to talk about the most recent research that I'm involved in, so sort of to take it forward, to bring it up to date so that you know where it's gone next, if you like. So the research that I conducted, I just want to give you the context first of all. It was an ethnographic piece of research, and I'll come back to that in a moment, but it was based in the United States and also in police forces across England and Wales. The United States aspect of it was in and around Washington, DC, and it's quite an interesting area. I went to about 4 different homicide units there, some of which were in the Virginia area that have the death penalty, and others of which were outside of that very draconian punishment system. And that had some interesting effects on how detectives dealt with suspects, as you can imagine, and what kind of deals could be struck. Also, Washington, D.C. had pushed lots of its problems populations out to PG County, where I did most of my research. So I visited there on 3 separate occasions at 3 very different times of the year, and spent in total sort of 3 to 4 months with different homicides units, one in particular that I became very embedded with. So it involves lots and lots of interviews with detectives and shadowing them, and very similar kind of process and procedure across numerous forces in England and Wales, obviously particularly in South Wales because it's close to home and I have lots of contacts there. So in terms of the methodology, I mentioned that it's ethnographic. I'm sure you all know what that means, but in case somebody doesn't, it's really kind of about embedding yourself in the daily lives of the people that you're trying to understand. And truly, it's associated with kind of anthropology originally. You'd go and you would study, you know, a tribe or a group of people that you had no access to in normal circumstances. In social sciences, we don't always go somewhere quite as exotic, although Washington, D.C. did have its exotic aspects. And so what I spent most of my time doing was, first of all, analysing lots of documents to try and understand what they say they do on paper. But as you know, if you really want to understand why and how people do what they do, you can't really read the written accounts because they're often constructed for all sorts of different audiences and different reasons. And so then I began to interview formally detectives, which is what this kind of first image, sorry, the little red light's not working properly. Go out with them when there was a homicide, so they would ring me up, whether it was 3 or 4 in the morning, they would come and collect me and they would take me with them, and I would see it from beginning to end, so from the crime scene through to the post-mortem, through to interviewing the suspects when they captured them, if they did, trying to speak to witnesses. What I should say is the homicide rate in America is at least 4 times greater than ours. They have a much bigger gun problem, obviously, as we all know, and a much bigger gang problem. But in particular, what they have is a huge problem in getting people to speak to them. And that's not just criminal people that wouldn't naturally want to speak to the police, it's anybody. Nobody wants to help the police with their inquiries for all sorts of different reasons. And they didn't used to have this problem. They used to have about a 90% what they call clear-up rate, which is much more similar to ours. But since the 60s, that's slowly plummeted. So one of the things I'm interested in is why and how that's happened and whether it could happen here. And, you know, we kind of celebrate our 90% clear-up rate, which I don't think is as good as it could be anyway. The other methodology is very informal. It's casual chats and coffee in corridors. It's chats when you get collected from the metro or when you're kind of on your way to and for crime scenes. And as I'm sure you'll appreciate, it's those little casual conversations that often have the gems of bits of information in them, really. So that's the kind of methodology. So the impacts, obviously the impact case study is written up in the document that you've all had a copy of today. So I won't go into huge detail, but just suffice it to say, really, what I've tried to do with my research is to publish it in outlets that both academics and practitioners and policymakers would tend to go toward. So the first one up there that says 10 things, that's the International Association of Chiefs of Police. They came to know about my research because I was over in the States and going to conferences and talks. And they like the idea that you don't just measure the success of a homicide by whether you catch the suspect and charge them. They were really keen on research that I had done with Martin Innes that shows that actually there's at least 4 measures of success. There's whether it's procedurally correct and robust. There's the traditional have you caught the suspect and charged them. There's what's the impact been on the community. Have you caused and wreaked havoc in the community in the course of this investigation, or have you made your communities feel safer? And finally, of course, we can reduce homicide. If we respond better to calls of domestic violence, we can impact upon them and stop them becoming domestic homicides. So they added that as the 10th item in their book, which went out to every single police chief across the whole of the United States. So that was the kind of the international impact that I was very pleased with. The others are closer to home. This was the British Murder Manual that cited my research, and that was actually based on some earlier work that I had done. These images are just depicting, the other thing that I've tried to do, again, is literally physically bringing together academics from around the world with interest and expertise in homicide investigation, with detectives, with managers, with homicide investigators, so that they can talk and debate about the issues face to face. Because often you don't understand each other's worlds and you won't quite get to grips with what you might want to do to help each other. And I want us to do research that's relevant to detectives, not that they read it and think this person doesn't really understand our world and what we do, which I think has happened often in the past. So that's been some of the impacts to date. And most recently, I published an article with a former detective who now kind of heads up our cold case unit in South Wales. And we looked at a decade's worth of homicide debriefs. Something that they don't do in America very often is debrief their homicides. What worked, what didn't work, what could we do better? We collect amazing information on that in England and Wales, but we don't really do anything with it. So we've summarised the findings from that and kind of moved that forward, we hope. So what am I doing right now? Well, partly because of CERN, the Criminal Investigation Research Network, which is a kind of organisation that I set up several years ago now, that brings together the practitioners and the academics. I teamed up with a professor of, he's a sociologist of forensic science in Northumbria, with another professor in Scotland who was a forensic scientist for many years and now teaches, And the three of us together were very pleased to win some money from the Leverhulme Trust, about £216,000, so that we can investigate for the first time in Britain how detectives use science and technology. At every tiny moment of the investigation, how does it work? How does it move the trajectory on? What's its impact? And how are decisions made between scientists and detectives and other specialists about what might be impactful to the investigation, what might help in charging the suspect? It's including everything from kind of the most obvious DNA at one end of the spectrum through to things like the analysis of Facebook sites and Twitter accounts of suspects or witnesses or friends of suspects, through to the obvious things like CCTV, mobile phone, fibre analysis, blood analysis. So we're kind of including every single known science and technology. And we've got 3 forces that have agreed to take part that have very different arrangements with forensic science services. So it's partly comparative. So we hope to have some really exciting, we've already got some exciting findings actually about how detectives want a very different kind of certainty from their experts than is sometimes possible. And so already some really interesting insights I think are coming out of that project. We only started in January, so we've got about another 2.5 years to go because it's a 3-year project. And so just to wrap up, my ultimate desire for the future is captured in this lovely kind of Banksy graffiti, which is keep your coins, I want change. Now, I don't know if my interpretation is correct, but what I took by that is that, you know, the coins is the quick, easy fix. What really you need is to change things so that there isn't poverty and there isn't homelessness. And I feel quite the same about things like homicide investigation. It's very easy to come up with some quick fits to try and raise the clear-up rate, some of which, of course, cause more problems because they put more pressure on detectives and then they make mistakes. And then we have miscarriages of justice. So what we need is a careful, considered approach to how we might improve the quality and outcome, and not just the outcome, also the quality. Because when cases go very wrong, like Stephen Lawrence in London, or like the very famous case in Wales of Lynette White, they reverberate in the community. People talk about them again and again and again, and whatever good detectives do, they still remember some of the bad. So every contact leaves a trace, forensically, but also with every officer that meets a member of the public. So that's one of my objectives. I hope to have an impact ready for 2020 in that area. And also understanding science and technology. And I put real and imagine because there's a kind of a science-y part of what goes on sometimes in investigations, and then there's the hard science. And what juries expect is sometimes quite simply not possible in terms of what detectives and scientists can really do. So I hope that the project I'm working on now will help us to understand much more clearly what can be done and what some of the limitations are. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. An absolutely fascinating case study, and I'm sure you had some interesting, if not risky, experiences. Thank you, and I hope the rest of you enjoyed it as much as I did. I'd like now to move to our second speaker, but meanwhile, may I just welcome Lord Bourne, who's arrived. Thank you, and we'll speak to you shortly. Our second speaker today is Professor David Blackby, who with Professor Phil Murphy, and Phil will join us for questions afterwards, both of whom are from the Labour Economics section of the University of Swansea, is going to be talking about improving the evidence base for policy in the areas of employment and public sector pay, which, as we all know, is a crucial issue, and we're looking forward to hearing what you're going to say, David. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, just start off with a picture of Swansea. I think most people will know where it was, but I did talking to the chairman. She said that there weren't as many people this year as you might get if you were given it in Wales, because people in England aren't interested in Wales. Well, it's a lovely place, and I put it up to remind people at Cardiff we have a real bay, they have an artificial one. But it's a beautiful campus. But we're talking today about regional economy and regional pay, and there are 4 people on this work. It's not just Phil and I, there are other people who aren't here. But just a little bit about economics at Swansea. It was established in 1937 and actually produced the first regional accounts for Wales. Indeed, they were the first regional accounts for any part of the UK as well. So there's a distinguished sort of background to the department, and we've tried to continue undertaking that work. In particular, we want impact. We've always wanted impact, and I suppose perhaps it's being a university in Wales where you can have more influence perhaps than in other parts of the country. So we have had research centres, and the latter one, Wizard, which is currently funding some of this work, is going from strength to strength. And if you look at, I suppose we're all interested as academics in terms of feedback because it feeds into REF, but even before then, in a research assessment exercise in 208, feedback to Swansea noted the important work being done in labour economics and evidence to the Welsh Government. Now, we do work on Wales, and we've done work on things like the gender pay gap, women in senior management, work on well-being after the Prime Minister put money into the ONS to produce data on well-being. And we've also, a couple of years back, research led by Phil Murphy, looked at economic inactivity in Wales, which was a massive problem. And Rhodri Morgan, when First Minister, noted the important contribution that research had made to developing policies in Wales. But what I'm going to look at is how we think we may have influenced some of the debates in the UK. And that debate goes back to the financial crisis, and I won't bore you with the sort of origins of it, of sort of where it started, but it did start in America, it didn't start in Britain, and there was a sort of a contagion around the world. But the important thing, I think, for our work was that when the coalition government came to power, there was a deficit of something like 11% of GDP. And as a result, there had to be cuts. And all governments or all parties have agreed on cuts. They differ on the size and the speed of them. We've seen welfare cuts earlier in the last Parliament, and we're going to see more in this. We've seen decisions made about the size of the public sector. And in the budget of 2012, we were told that we could lose 750,000 public sector workers by 2016-17. That has massive implications for Wales because we have a higher proportion of workers in the public sector than other parts of the country. And there was important work done by the Centre of the Cities, which showed that of the major cities in the UK, the two that were going to be worst hit were going to be Newport and Swansea. Now, to a certain extent, that hasn't happened for a number of reasons, but you've got to remember only partway through the fiscal consolidation process, so there are more job losses on the way. When it came to the election in 2010, all parties were talking about control of public sector pay. Whether it was the Labour, Conservatives or Liberals, they all had their own policies. And as a result, the coalition government came up with a pay freeze for public sector workers and also limited any increase to those people, or a smaller increase of £250 for those under 21,000. And that was estimated would save over £3 billion. What the coalition government also did was the Chancellor of the Exchequer asked the pay review bodies to look at if it could make public sector pay more responsive to local labour market conditions. That means in areas where you've got high unemployment, perhaps public sector pay should be lower. And indeed, they referred, or the Treasury referred to estimates by the Institute of Fiscal Studies suggesting that public sector pay was 8% higher than private sector pay when you'd undertaken some controls. And their evidence, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and I'm always impressed with the Institute of Fiscal Studies, the government will come out with some figures, and the Institute of Fiscal Studies will criticise them. The Labour Party will say, look, the Institute of Fiscal Studies has criticise your figures, and then they'll criticise their figures. So basically, they're a think tank who criticises everyone. What we're going to do is criticise them, and that doesn't happen very often. But what the Institute of Fiscal Studies did was that they showed that the pay premium for public sector workers was about 8.3%. Office of National Statistics also came up with figures of just under 8%. But what was interesting is that the Institute of Fiscal Studies showed that there was vast variation across regions. So, for example, and Wales was in the firing line, because in Wales, men were earning 18% more, women 18.5%. In Yorkshire, Homicide, Scotland, I suppose North Sea Oil, men might be paid pretty well, but a big public sector pay gap for women. And then when you got down to London and the South East, it was much smaller. In the South East, they actually may have been paid less than they should have compared with people in the private sector. So this was the sort of table that the Treasury was suggesting. This is why we need regional pay, or more local pay. So if you actually just look at the raw differential, these are the Institute of Fiscal Studies figures, then the difference between public sector and private sector workers can be up to 20%. But what we do know is that public sector workers are more likely to have a degree, longer tenure, and when you control for factors that economists think are important in determining earnings, then you get this much smaller differential. 5% for men, 11% for females, 8% overall. Well, what we did was question their research. In other words, we found that their estimates were sensitive to a number of factors. You can look at what you include in your earnings function, and for example, we would include organisational size. I wouldn't want to compare somebody working with the government with somebody working in a paper shop. You'd really want to compare a government worker with somebody working in a large private sector organisation. So we included that. And also our research was taken on board by the Welsh Government, who provided very impressive evidence, I think, to the pay review bodies, and also very wisely cited our research. But that's a pretty impressive document. But what we did then, and this is the bulk of our research, we looked at the Institute of Fiscal Studies work. Well, this were their results. We tried to reproduce it. So we're using micro data, lots of observations. We near enough produced it very, very closely. Then we made some different definitions. In other words, we controlled for wages what we think is more appropriately. And then we added more controls that economists have found have affected earnings. Things like plant size, things like tenure. We expect as we get more experience, more skills on the job, our salary will go up. Then interestingly, what we found was that the differential didn't favour the private sector, the public sector. It actually favoured the private sector for males, but in females there is still a small premium for public sector workers. So that was our main results. We also did then look at the distribution of earnings, and Phil might talk about that later because that's where our research is going at the moment. So when we look at a differential at the average, some people at the bottom and those people at the top may be very different. So for example, there's a lot of concern where public sector workers might earn more than the Prime Minister. But we know there are lots of football players, lots of people in the private sector earn a lot more than that. If you want to get good quality people running our public sector organisations, you may have to pay a little bit more than they're paying at the moment. Not possibly very popular with the media. But as a result of our work and other work, the Chancellor in his autumn statement ruled out market-facing pay. And as a result, what he said, this means that continuing with national pay bargaining in the NHS, the prison service, and we will not make a change to civil service arrangements either. And the Conservative Party manifesto actually rules out regional pay for this Parliament. In terms of the impact of our research, then the Chief Economist at the Office of Manpower Economics, and this is the person who deals with the pay body, actually noted that our research was important in helping the pay review bodies come to their decision. In the case of these pay review bodies, they rejected, or at least a number of them rejected, market-facing pay or regional pay. When it came to the ONS, we had their differential of just under the Institute of Fiscal Studies, 7 rather than 8. But when they included some of the things that we'd included in our equation, the differential goes down to 2.5%, not massive at all. And as a result, the Deputy Director of the Public Policy Analysis Division actually noted how our work had influenced their work in terms of providing a smaller differential. So, having considered our work and having studied the work of Swansea on this variable, we then explored using it within our own model, which improved our analysis and offered new insights. So I suppose in conclusion, what our research has sort of has led to, possibly the impact we may have had, is that we joined a debate that was initiated by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which had implications for millions of public sector employees. If it had gone through, it would have meant that many public sector workers in relatively less prosperous areas, and that would have included Wales, the North East, the North West, would have seen a cut in their real wages at a time when their wages were probably frozen anyway. So to a certain extent, we thought we've entered a national debate. We've provided evidence in an academic manner, and we believe we have impact. And what Phil is doing at the moment, in terms of it's just not the past, looking into the future, we're looking at this issue of what happens at different points in the distribution. Because in the past we've seen, that you go back to the turn of this century, schools were having problems recruiting good quality teachers. So if you hold public sector pay down for too long, you have implications for recruitment and retention. Now, the government in the budget has announced that it sees public sector pay increasing by 1% for the next 4 years. That may have implications for the quality of recruitment. It may have implications for retention. And it's up to academics like us to at least challenge that debate and possibly influence it. I think that's it.
Thank you. David and Phil, it couldn't be a more timely contribution, I think, to understanding the impact of social science in public policy. Not many of us can actually have achieved as much as you have in that particular example. Thank you very much. Now, we're going to move to questions and answers after Lord Bourne has spoken. So I'd now like to call upon Lord Bourne to address us. As many in the audience will know, he was a professor of law at Swansea Law School before entering the Welsh Assembly, where he led the Conservative group until 2011. He joined the House of Lords in 2013 and serves in the current Westminster government as Parliamentary Under Secretary in the Wales office, as well as Parliamentary Under Secretary in the Department of Energy and Climate Change. I know they make you work hard in the Lords, but more than most, you'll know about social science in Wales, so we're delighted to have you here today, Lord Bourne. Thank you very much.
Diolch Cadeirydd. First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me here to speak to you this afternoon. Diolch am y gwahoddiad I siarad am y prynhawn yma. I'm pleased that the social science community in Wales remains strong and vibrant, and it's been fascinating listening to Fiona and David, and a great privilege. Ladies and gentlemen, social sciences play a vital role in driving innovation in policy making. It's through social research that we can truly understand many of the issues facing modern society. There is rarely a one-size-fits-all solution to addressing these issues across our country. Instead, policies need to be developed that meet the particular needs of local communities in a way that cannot be delivered through the old-style model of a highly centralised nation-state. Instead, decisions need to be made as close as possible to the people that are affected by them, and I believe that the government's programme of decentralisation and localism will help achieve this. Last September, for the first time in nearly a century, the United Kingdom faced the fundamental question of whether a part of the Union would break away to form an independent state. The public debate that surrounded the Scottish referendum brought to the fore the crucial issues of national identity and how people relate to government. The battle to save the Union was won, but this is not the time, in my opinion, to rest on our laurels. The government recognises that we must step up to the challenge of bringing every part of our United Kingdom together to enable our nations and regions to coexist within one state while giving people more direct power over the areas in which they live. In doing so, we will build on our record in the last Parliament, during which we delivered one of the most extensive programmes of devolution of any government. In Wales alone, we delivered a referendum on full law-making powers for the National Assembly. I was part of the National Assembly when that was happening, and there was an all-party consensus within the Assembly about that, which was a feature, I think, that distinguishes the Welsh scenario from the Scottish one. And then a commission to consider the future of devolution in Wales, and a Wales Act, very recently, devolving tax and borrowing powers for the first time. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we intend to honour the promises that we made during the general election campaign on devolution, to bring fairness to all parts of the United Kingdom. We've already introduced a bill into Parliament which delivers on the Smith Agreement on further powers for Scotland. It's making its way through the Commons as we speak. When enacted, it will make the Scottish Parliament one of the most powerful devolved parliaments in the world. In Northern Ireland, we will take forward the Stormont House Agreement to help create a more prosperous, stable and secure future for the people there. And we will bring forward legislation which meets our commitments on the future of devolution to Wales, And it's on this, of course, which I will focus on this afternoon. But of course, no constitutional settlement could be complete if it did not also offer fairness to England. England, of course, has largely been the dog that hasn't barked in the devolution debate, or at least not barked yet. Fairness by making Parliament work in a way that ensures decisions that affect England or England and Wales only can be taken by a majority of MPs from constituencies of those nations. Now, I recognise that there are challenges associated with how one defines that, but I think most people, in fairness, would recognise there is a problem there is a conundrum there that needs to be addressed. And fairness in continuing our programme of localism to decentralise powers to local communities in England, with the potential for that happening in Wales as well. Just in parenthesis, discussions are going on at the moment, as probably people are aware, between the Welsh Government, the Wales Office, Cardiff City Council, and other players about the Cardiff City region. In England, providing for elected metro mayors who will take on responsibility for areas such as transport and skills to deliver local growth for communities and to make sure local people keep the rewards of that growth. Now, it may be that the Welsh model is slightly different, but it is important that there are opportunities afforded to city regions in Wales. And at the moment, as I say, the focus is on Cardiff, but that doesn't certainly rule out doing other things for Swansea and indeed in North Wales. So the model, because they're much smaller, will, I think, necessarily be somewhat different. What we're looking for in this Parliament is new powers devolved across the United Kingdom, a union fit for the 21st century. But as I say, there is no one-size-fits-all approach to devolution. Those that argue that Wales should have the same powers, identical powers as Scotland, forget the way that individual devolution settlements evolved to reflect the different histories, the distinct histories, circumstances and geographies of the different parts of the United Kingdom. Wales is not Scotland. The economic and social boundaries of Wales and England are intertwined to a far greater degree than England is with Scotland. Far more people live near the border on either side of the border in England and Wales than is the case in Scotland, in proximity to it. I mean, there's no, I'd say nobody, but very few people live near the border in Scotland. In comparative terms, Edinburgh and Glasgow are quite some way away from the English-Scottish border. The porous nature of our border sees thousands of people crossing it every single day, often unaware of the fact that they're doing so, like Monsieur Jourdain in Molière's The Bourgeois Gentilhomme, who spoke prose all his life without knowing it. I mean, much the same way, people are not conscious of the English-Welsh border in a way that probably more people are aware of the English-Scottish one, if only because of Gretna Green on the border there. While Scotland has seen the rise of nationalism, support for independence in Wales stands at a record low. It's barely moved a blip, according to the polls, and I appreciate that there are dangers of relying on opinion polls just at the moment, or indeed probably at any time. But nevertheless, I mean, the evidence of the general election suggests that there wasn't a massive blip, a massive change in support for Plaid Cymru in an upwards direction, certainly. I don't want to make too much of that, but I think it once again shows that we are dealing with two very different nations when we're looking at Wales and Scotland. Having been a member of the National Assembly from its inception until 2011, I've had the opportunity, indeed privilege, to see it grow and mature as an institution, from its beginnings as an executive body to taking on lawmaking powers following the 2011 referendum. The National Assembly of Wales, for Wales, has become a centre for deliberation and decision-making and a centre for Welsh national life. Most of you will probably know that I was also a member of the Commission on Devolution in Wales, the Silk Commission, which was very well guided by Paul Silk. We had the opportunity to conduct our own social research to inform our work, and did so. It comprised the four main political parties, the four parties represented in the National Assembly in Wales, and we went out to speak to members of the public, businesses, and organisations about the future of devolution and, very importantly, the future of Wales. You will appreciate, I'm sure, the breadth of views that we received, but one of the key messages we heard that there should be a clear purpose for powers being devolved. They should be used to make Wales stronger, benefiting Welsh business and the lives of people up and down Wales. That was, I think, also a philosophy that was very much at the heart of the St David's Day process that Stephen Crabb, the Secretary of State for Wales, embarked on last year. It was a process that reached an agreement on the way forward for Welsh devolution and identified consensus amongst the four main parties in Wales on where the balance of power should lie between Westminster and the National Assembly in Cardiff, in Wales. The outcome of this work, the St David's Day Agreement, represents a blueprint for the future of Welsh devolution, one that is, I believe, clearer, fairer and stronger. We will introduce a new reserve powers model of devolution that will clarify the division of responsibilities between Westminster and the National Assembly. And I think, again, all four political parties were at one on this, and there is obviously now discussion going on between the Welsh Government and the Wales Office and Westminster as to what those reserve powers should be. But the concept of reserve powers was something that got support across the board. Wales has suffered in the past from a devolution settlement that was poorly drafted and not fit for purpose. I don't think we need to rehearse the reasons for that. It was a very different model from the Scottish model. And it's meant that disputes over where powers lie have had to be resolved by the Supreme Court. Hopefully, though no system can ever guarantee that in totality, hopefully that is now going to be minimised by this new model. The new model of devolution will mean that everything will be devolved unless it's expressly reserved to Westminster, similar model to the Scottish one. We're indeed the same model. We will deliver a fairer settlement through our commitment to implement a floor in the relative level of funding provided to the Welsh Government in the expectation that the Welsh Government will call a referendum on the devolution of income tax, as provided for in the Wales Act of last year. And that discussion is an ongoing one between the Wales Office and the Welsh Government. And we will strengthen devolution by implementing our St David's Day commitments to devolve more powers to the Assembly in areas such as transport, energy and elections, as well as powers that will enable the Assembly to manage its own affairs on matters like elections, the term it uses to describe itself if it wants to become a parliament, rose by any other name, but that will be a matter for the National Assembly to determine once this legislation has gone through. I should say that there'll be pre-legislative scrutiny of the Wales Bill this autumn, and then the bill will then be introduced in the next session and should become law in early 2017. But we're already working on a Wales Bill that will legislate for these areas. We intend, as I say, to publish the bill in the autumn and introduce it next year, and it should become law in the year after that. But with this additional responsibility must also come greater accountability of the Welsh Government to the people of Wales. For it to become a truly mature institution, it has to be accountable to the people of Wales, not just for how public money is spent, but also for how it's raised. The Wales Act 2014 includes powers for the Assembly to take control of nearly £2 billion of income tax revenue if the people of Wales support that in a referendum. We believe, as I say, that the Welsh Government should call this referendum, and then it's for political parties to work to ensure that referendum is passed. I think it's important that that should happen. It's time then to settle the constitutional debate in Wales for the long term. This has perhaps gone on for too long. To move on from the seemingly constant debate about whether the Assembly has the right powers to one which centres around how the powers are used for the benefit of Wales, for the benefit of the people of Wales, for the benefit of Welsh business, Welsh agriculture, and so on. Because in reality, nobody on the doorsteps of Wales is talking about a reserve powers model. Nobody is concerned about the detailed operation of the Barnett formula, or indeed really the detailed operation of the devolution settlement. Yes, of course, it affects how the Assembly operates, but as many of you will know, in the election that's just passed, people in Wales were talking about the same issues on doorsteps up and down the country, and these were health, education, the economy, and so on. So people were talking about jobs, education, the economy, health service, tourism. These are the things that matter. So it's important that we drive through these changes, I don't think it'll be a problem of pushing particularly hard, because I think there's a consensus around this. And then we can focus on what I think really truly does matter for the people of Wales, and that is delivering for Wales. But admittedly, to do that, we've got to get the settlement right. I think this St David's Day Agreement and the Wales Bill that will follow next year, and then the Wales Act 2017, I think will do just that, and I look forward very much to that happening. But once again, Madam Chairman, thank you very much indeed for the invitation to be here today. It's a great pleasure. I'd much rather be in Swansea or even Cardiff discussing this, but it's a great pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lord Bourne. A most succinct, if I may say so, account of a really rather complex set of legislative changes and proposals, which I think many in England are less familiar with, and it was very useful to have that account, and I'm delighted to have it. Just to bring to your attention, for those of you in the booklet, there is indeed a case study on public opinion and Welsh devolution, so you might wish to just look at what Professor Wynne Jones and Professor Scully at Aber and Cardiff found when they looked at the public's opinions of devolution. Well, that's delightful that you can stay. Thank you. Right, well, on which note now I'd like to open up. I hope you can, Phil is joining us as well. I hope you can cast your mind back to the first and the second of our academic presentations, as well as Lord Bourne's presentation. Could I ask you to say who you are, and if you have an organisational affiliation, just give us that. And there are roving mics, so that everyone can hear everyone else. Please do wait for a mic. Who would like to go first? Woody. Woody.
Thank you. Woody Khan, Royal Society for Public Health. Professor Brookman, your talk resonated with me very strongly. I've only been involved in look-backs on a few homicides, but hundreds and hundreds of suicides in the last 30 years. And I advise that fine Welsh MP, Madeleine Moon, who chairs the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Suicide Prevention. Now, there are things that Ceridwen mentioned about longitudinal research that have changed professional practice with suicide on a big scale, looking way upstream. But of all the look-backs I've been involved with at a local, case-by-case basis, I can safely say, for example, one was a series of 900, nothing changed in professional practice. You talked about this with the look-backs, the debriefs with the police. How do we have an imaginative leap using disciplines like ethnography such that professional practice is more flexible, more adaptable in relation to local evidence?
Would you like to answer that, or have a go at answering it?
Right. Are you saying how can ethnographic research in particular help?
Any social science, particularly ethnography.
Okay.
Large number longitudinal research has helped a little bit in terms of over-the-counter medicines, in terms of British Transport Police and safety in rail stations. But the sort of debriefing you're talking about, which I've seen hundreds and hundreds of times, doesn't seem to change professional practice.
Yeah, what detectives have told me, many hundreds of them actually, because I've interviewed many more people than I actually spoke about today, is that the philosophy in major crime, at least, is to move on to the next case. They're very, very busy, and so even though they do debrief individual cases, and of course they talk about these things at the SIO conference that they have once a year, it's very difficult unless something's mandated, I suppose, for it to change, or unless they see within their culture and their organisation that it can blend in, that it's not going to cause them to have a lot more work to do. So, but also I would say that our detectives say that they have a really good gold model of investigation, that it works most of the time, and then every now and again something goes wrong. And so unless they pick up the phone and tell somebody else, or somebody rings them, there doesn't seem to be a place for it to automatically be generated across all of the forces. I suppose the way that research can help is through things like the organisation CERN that I mentioned, bringing together detectives, bringing together academics so that they can see some evidence base that might convince them perhaps a little more. So that's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head, is about bringing them together. It's no good just writing things and giving them documents. People haven't got time to look at them. So getting people together, I think, is really important.
Thank you. Gentleman there.
Kelvin Hopkins, MP, Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group of Social Science and Policy. I'm really fascinated by murder statistics or homicide statistics, and have been for a long time. America is extraordinary. No other developed country has murder rates like that. Recently was in Toronto. Toronto's not far from Detroit. but the murder rates are quite different. What is it about America that is there a simple answer to why they have such astonishing murder rates, and what is the difference even between America and Canada next door to each other?
I think there's huge cultural issues about, well, the firearms is in and of itself a huge problem, but there are countries, as I'm sure you know, that have firearms and don't have such significant problems in terms of actually using them illegally. I think there's a huge gap between the rich and poor, which causes huge, segments of the population to feel disenfranchised, to feel isolated, to never even contemplate going to the police for help, even if it's for relatively minor, disputes, and so they then escalate. There's gang problems. In fact, there's a massive drop in homicide around many parts of the world in the last kind of 3-4 years, in the UK as well. And in most parts of America, other than Chicago, for example, because they have such a huge embedded gang problem. So I think part of the problem is about gangs and guns. When I was in the States, that formed sort of 60, 70, 80% of their homicides were of that nature, and that become particularly challenging to investigate. I don't know why Canada's different because I haven't done any research there. But I suspect it's about cultures, communities, and whether you feel a part of where you live.
Thank you. Other questions or views? But I wonder then, while some of you are gathering your thoughts, whether I could put a question to you, Lord Bourne. Fascinating in terms of what's being devolved in the proposed legislation. Will this also lead to a change in the legal system between England and Wales? Because, of course, the English abolished the Welsh legal system some hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Most people don't even know that the Welsh had some legal system which was rather different. What will happen to that?
You're right, it is certainly an issue. It's an issue that was looked at by the Silk Commission and again raised its head during the discussions on the St David's Day Agreement. I mean, basically, the legal system, English-Welsh legal system, will be retained as is, particularly in the area of private law, where things like, I think this is done very much with the support of the First Minister, I hope I'm right in saying that, I think I am, on things like contract law will remain the same, the law of tort and so on, the common law will remain the same. Of course, the Scottish system is different anyway. Scotland followed the Romano-Dutch legal system, so the Scottish system, even when it was more closely integrated within the United Kingdom, even when we didn't have a Scottish Parliament, the Scottish legal system, of course, was pretty much entirely different and remains so. That said, it does need careful handling because obviously now we have moved to a system where the Welsh Assembly can pass primary legislation. It's necessarily going to mean there is a separate body of Welsh law developing. So I suppose in a very sort of British pragmatic way, we do need to recognise that and to approach that in a common sense way. I don't think it will present real difficulties. I mean, after all, in the United States, they have their federal laws as well as their state laws. So you're right, it presents challenges, but broadly speaking, the integrity of an English-Welsh legal system will be retained. I think there are things, certainly the way the Silk Commission, I suspect they're coming forward in the legislation when published, to ensure that there are Welsh representatives on the Supreme Court and things of this nature to make sure that the Welsh voice is properly heard there. We generally do very well even without that. The current head of the Royal Commission, for example, is Welsh and so on, but we do want to institutionalise that and embed that to make sure it happens.
Thank you.
Could I pose a question to Fiona based on that?
Sure.
Just a supplementary, which is just a very interesting topic, and I think very interesting to draw that distinction between Toronto and Detroit. And I'm sure you're right about the gang culture and the arms and so on. There's something that always strikes me about the United States, and I don't think this is a feature of the differentiation of the rich and the poor, though admittedly that will feed into it as well. But the sieges that we see at schools, I mean, very often middle-class kids, not always, but very often, and not isolated to the United States, but it seems much more a feature of the United States than any, and I think President Obama has said as much himself, very much a feature of the United States as opposed to anywhere else on earth. And I just wonder why that is, and if that's something you touched on in your research.
Yeah, I haven't specifically explored that in my research. There is work out there trying to understand why, as you say, they're so unique in having these school massacres. I think it is made easier by having a lethal weapon that that is so easy to use, it puts a distance. You know, if you're going to plunge a knife into somebody, that's a bit more difficult to do. So I do think that helps, but I think often these young people might appear to be, I'm not saying they're not middle class, but some of them do just have you know, mental health problems as well, of course, that haven't been addressed, that haven't been picked up. And so they actually need help before they get to that stage. So I think some of it's complex, some of it genuinely is about illnesses, some of it's about cultures of masculinity and carrying weapons. We have a knife weapon problem in some of our cities, of course, anyway, and guns in some of our cities in Britain, not in Wales at the moment, luckily. I mean, the other thing I should have said is there is not a great relationship with the police, and I think that's another huge issue. In a normal city, we have some issues with distrust of police in some of our communities here, which needs to be tackled. But generally speaking, most people, if it was a very serious crime, would help the police. The situation in most parts of America that I was in, it was quite the reverse. You really would go out of your way to avoid helping them. So there's this kind of gulf between justice and the rest of the society, which I think is something that we don't know enough about, perhaps, as well. And huge problems of racism, and you know, the recent shootings of people isn't going to help.
Other points of view? Does anyone want to pick up this interesting impact on the Treasury that our Swansea team has had, or where we go from there? Claire.
Thank you. I'm Claire Donovan from Brunel University, and I'm a new member of the board of the Campaign for Social Science. I was very interested to hear about the different case studies that have been presented today, and about the impact that these have had on policy or practice or government. I wonder if you could share with us your thoughts on how academics, or some tips that you could give to the academic community about how to make that research have impact, and about engagement and what we can learn from that. And perhaps conversely, from the point of view of government, how social science, what could social science do to help with that?
So I think that's really a question for the whole panel, isn't it? With people sitting in their different locations. From the academics, what you think works, but also Lord Bourne, from your experience of what really makes you take note of a piece of research when it crosses your desk, or you hear it on the radio, that sort of thing. Would you like to kick off, Phil?
Yeah, I'll kick off on that one. I think we've entered a new era in that increasingly now academics are not only being assessed in terms of their research outputs, but also the impact that research generates. So we're entering into a slightly different playing field, and I think those incentives, therefore, to get our work out there and affecting policy are much higher. They affect people's career progression, etc. So that's where the incentive lies. Clearly, in terms of what should you be doing in terms of getting your research known to policymakers, I think that's crucially dependent on networks. And I know in Wales we benefit from being associated with organisations like Wizard and RIAS that has a direct line of communication to government ministers. We're also a fairly close-knit community. We also encompass a public policy institute for Wales, which has direct talks on a regular basis with ministers within Wales and their special advisors. So that's one way through these research centres who also offer policy briefings, emphasising the need to show research has impact, I think is making it easier for seasoned academics as well as newer career developing academics. So I think the climate is changing, but you really need to tap into networks to get your research out there.
David, do you want to add anything to that?
I wouldn't disagree with Phil. I agree totally with him. I think as an economist, I would say this, wouldn't I, that people respond to incentives. To a certain extent, in academia, people were doing work which had impact when there wasn't really an incentive to do it. So if you're a typical academic, you talk about your 4-star publications, but there have been academics who've sort of got on and had impact. What's changed between the research assessment exercise in 2008 and the REF in 2014 is that impact was a criteria. And I think it relates back to Gordon Brown. It's a very expensive process of a REF where you read all these papers, you assess them, very time consuming. And Gordon Brown said, well, why are we doing all this? Well, he introduced impact. And I think impact is going to get bigger. So I'm not too concerned about academics. They will respond to incentives and they will have impact. I think we are lucky. It is easier in Wales, I think, than possibly in Brunel. I don't know. It is a small community and we do have a Welsh government. At one time, the Welsh government implemented policy. So the old Welsh office, you had a policy, Wales implemented. In this environment with devolution now, they want new policies. So they're actively looking for ideas. So it's very easy for an academic to have impact. And I think Lord Bourne talked about things like city regions, for example. Now, to a certain extent, why we've ever got city regions in Wales, I don't know. Because to a certain extent, we had those in England. Wales is smaller than Birmingham. All of a sudden, we've got 2 in Wales. And Lord Vaughan talked about Cardiff. And if you look at my slide about the bay, why has Cardiff got a bay? It's because a massive amount of regeneration money went into Cardiff. And now all of a sudden, you're talking about now a metro system in Cardiff. But what I'm worried about in Wales, when you talk about city regions, what happened to rural areas? So to a certain extent, you've got these 2 cities, what happened to the North Wales? What happened to rural areas? So I think as academics, it's easier, the press want information, we can supply information to the press, we can challenge academics. And I think it's easier in Wales, but it shouldn't be that difficult in England, I think, because the impact of gender is increasing.
Lord Bourne, we know how busy politicians are and how many things cross your desk and all sorts of different things. How do you manage to sort of respond to the notion of what is useful for you?
Yes. Could I just pick up
of course.
The point David made first, but of course I'll come on to that. I mean, first of all, we don't have the city regions yet. I mean, that very much depends on whether people want it, and there's cross-institutional talking, cross-party talking in Cardiff at the moment, and the metro system, of course, is something the Welsh Government wants to deliver independently of whether there's a Cardiff city region. So there's work to be done on that. But, you know, I wasn't trying to set up urban Wales, as it were, against rural Wales. There are certainly things that need doing for rural Wales. I used to represent a large chunk of it, so I don't need convincing on that. I quite agree. In terms of applied social sciences, and I agree very much with what's been said about small nation. I mean, I think that helps with it being a small nation. Access to ministers in Welsh Government is very easy. There's a lot of familial interchange in Wales because of the nature of Wales, and we have some very, very strong applied social sciences departments in Wales. The other thing I think that certainly struck me on the presentations today was the relevance and the lack of jargon. I mean, as we're all aware, there's a great tendency, I think, for anybody who's expert, regardless of the field, to lapse into jargon and acronyms. I can only speak personally, I find nothing more irritating than acronyms, and you're flicking through it, and sometimes you should know what the acronym means, but very often you don't. And you're spending, you know, every 5 minutes you come across a fresh acronym. What on earth does this mean? So you Google it, and there are about 5 different possible answers, so you're no better off. So to make it practical, to make it relevant, to make it apposite, and to have a clear message, and that was certainly true of the two presentations I heard today. I have a definite message there, easily comprehensible, and you may disagree or agree with the conclusions, but you recognise there's an issue there. So I think it's making it relevant, making it punchy. I think that's important. But in the Welsh context, we are fortunate in it being a small nation, access to institutions, access to ministers and so on. That's undoubtedly true. And Wizarded certainly helps as well. These institutions do.
Indeed. I was at a meeting at the Public Policy Institute of Wales yesterday, and we were talking about the work they're having to do in the public policy to translate some of the research reports that very eminent people have done, but actually are not in that sense fit for policy purpose, because people do need to have something that's very clearly written and is understandable by a non-expert, a non-specialist. That doesn't mean to say there isn't room. I would never suggest there's no room for the academic article talking to experts. But you have to look at different articles for different audiences, I think, different ways of writing. And I think what I picked up also from Fiona was very much that face-to-face discussions are sometimes more important than the written word. The written word to back it up, perhaps, if people want to know more, but helping people understand how the research you've done will have an impact on their lives often is easier if you talk to them. Yes. Yeah. We're coming to the end of our time. I don't want to hold you here if you want to go, but I don't want anyone who wants to put a question or raise a point of view to any of our panel doesn't have the opportunity to have one. Anyone else? Yes. Sorry, I don't know you. Who are?
Professor Martin Stringer.
Martin?
Martin Stringer.
Thank you,
for Pro-Vice Chancellor at the University of Swansea. So just to say thank you very much for hosting this and putting it on. A very impressive event. I just want to move the discussion slightly in terms of the research world and getting the funding that we need for research. There's much more movement now towards Europe. We've also, we've heard today some very important things about impact in the UK, impact in the States. And having recently moved to my position at the University of Swansea, recognising a very different context in terms of the relationship between Wales and Europe. I just wondered whether the panel wanted to sort of make any comment, either sort of within the social science research or more generally, about that sort of position within the context of Europe.
What do you think the different relationship is between Wales and Europe? The rest of Europe, I mean.
I previously was at the University of Birmingham, but certainly within Wales, there is a sense that Wales as a region has a sort of sense of identity within the context of Europe, much more clearly than sort of the West Midlands, for example.
I think that's true of Scotland as well, isn't it?
It probably is true of Scotland as well. But also, in terms of funding and issues of that sort, the access to funding through some of the Welsh context sort of puts us in a slightly different position. And I think it is an important element as we develop sort of social sciences within Wales, that we sort of take that European context very seriously.
Interesting point. Any observations, David?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose as an academic, when I started off my research, you started off with small grants from small areas, from small organisations, and the Welsh Government, WDA, Equal Opportunities Commission is where we would start off. I suppose then you aim for things like the research councils, the SRC, it's very prestigious, and that's where Wizard is currently funded from at the moment. But I suppose going forward, there is the European Research Council, that's going to be important, and then you've got the Horizon 2020. And what we know there is that networks are going to be important, so it's sort of developing those networks, as other speakers have suggested. We also, in Wales, not Brunel possibly, sadly, but in Wales we've got a slight advantage, is that we're in a relatively poor area. So people want to partner with us because it looks good on their application. So I think we are doing important work, because if you look at what Europe, one of the major problems in Europe, it's going to be unemployment. It has been, Lisbon Accord. If you're working in that area and matching up with other experts in the field, then you can do really interesting work. And I think what Wizard does and tries to do is the stuff at the boundaries of disciplines, which I think is interesting. So if sociologists don't usually talk to economists, but if you can and you can get them to work together, you can do really interesting work. And I think it's the international work that's important, because we need to benchmark Wales. Sometimes we're too inward looking in Wales and we just say, how are we doing in Wales? But you need to benchmark education, you need to benchmark health against not only the rest of the UK, but against the rest of Europe. Because what we want to do, we want to live in a world-class economy, a world-class society. You can only do that, I think, by benchmarking against other areas.
Any other comments?
I've just got one quick comment. So did you say you're the Vice-Chancellor?
Pro-Vice-Chancellor.
Well, what I think about research, not so much Europe, but about winning any kind of money from anywhere, is it takes time. And I feel very sorry for colleagues who feel under huge pressure to get money, because that's the big thing now. It's go away and get money. Don't even come and ask me for research time. You go and get some money. And people feeling pressure to get it quickly. I got my Leverhulme fund. It took time. I crafted it, I thought about it. It was based on lots of backdrop research that I'd already done. And people are panicking and rushing and getting them, and then they're not getting the money, they're getting rejected, and then they feel disheartened. And so I think that's the critical thing, is you need to have a genuine idea, not just feel that you have to be in a huge rush to go and get money. And people in your position can give people the time to do it.
I think that's a plea from the heart there. Any other comments on the panel?
Just very quickly, I agree with the point about the partnering, and it's perhaps somewhat easier in Wales because of the fact cohesion funding and so on comes into Wales as it does into parts of Scotland, Merseyside and Cornwall, and I suspect these areas therefore have got probably closer ties with Europe. But the other thing I just would mention are there are some programmes that that depend on working across national boundaries, and of course the proximity, relative proximity to Southern Ireland to Ireland means that we're able to do that on occasion as well, and that I think means that there is that close tie with Europe.
But a very interesting question, thank you, and I'm sure that all of us feel that we do need to keep the avenues of funding from Europe open, and there are implications therefore in the forthcoming debate about Europe, which will directly affect social science community if we go one way rather than the other. I guess you understand what I'm saying. Anyhow, this may be the moment to bring to halt. We've had a very interesting session. I very much appreciated our 2 case studies. In choosing them, we wanted obviously to pick up rather different ones, one from each other. But if you look at the booklet, you will see that there's many case studies that are equally interesting. And I'm sure you could go back to the researchers in those case studies if you want to know more and find out how you can find out more from them about what they did and what they're doing now. So do use this as a starting point for your entry into the Welsh social science community. It's one of the starting points anyhow. Wizard and Rias are clearly others, as of course is the growing Public Policy Institute for Wales. But thank you very much from our academics, and Lord Bourne, thank you very much too, because I know how busy you are, and we very much appreciated you coming. And now we're going to be much better informed than we were about the various stages ahead for the Welsh nation in its devolution journey, you might say. Thank you all, and to our team who've helped put this on, very much appreciate your handling of it so well. So thank you all for coming, and my last point is that the Academy will be, we've picked up the REF today, we've heard about that and the comments. The Academy is at the moment putting ideas together for an event on the REF in the autumn. You will not be surprised to know that we all felt that we should do things on the REF, and we're beginning to put it together. And watch this space if you want to know more about the evaluation of the 2014 process and the lessons learnt, evidence-based lessons learnt obviously, and what is being proposed or what is on the agenda from HEFCE. So thank you all.